everyone who have joined online. Thank you so much for joining. We have been hosting a series of meetings as a group activity for us to learn how to venture into the field of startup. And our team is just a few of the Xooglers who are interested in the field, and we want to create a combination of self-learning, teaching, meaning if there's a topic, for example, I'm interested, I use this as an opportunity to learn about it and then also present and share the knowledge with other people, as well as having distinguished guest speakers. Today we have Manu with more than a decade experience in investment with an amazing track record. And I would like to invite you to introduce yourself. And I have had a privilege to take a look at the deck, and it's like above and beyond whatever I would have wished for. Hungry minds for learning about how to venture into investment.
Well, thank you, Sarah. You guys are too kind, and Chris and Kush as well. So I'll give you a quick background so that at least you can place where I come from, and then we can jump in. And by the way, feel free to interrupt anytime. We'll make it as dialogue based as possible. So. And I'll let you sort of choose how do you get people on the screen to actually raise their hands and ask questions as well.
Okay.
So my background, so I actually, I was at Google from 2004 to 2008, roughly 4.5 years. I left a few weeks after Lehman Brothers collapsed because I thought that was the perfect time to do a startup. Everything was cheaper. You could hire people easier. Lots of layoffs, so that meant things were cheaper. Real estate was cheaper. I was able to get $1.50 per square foot in Mission. It was really cheap, right? It was literally 6 months earlier it was $8 a square foot, and I got a 5-year lease for $1.50.
Wow.
So everything gets easier, right? So your money goes further. So as a scrappy entrepreneur, you want to be able to not, it's not, even if you raise money, your money is being raised on dilution to yourself, right? And so if you can actually do better and go further with money. And I don't believe when people sort of say, well, the markets are down and people are not investing. There's always money for good startups, right? What happens is the shit ones don't actually get funded, right? When the times are good, everything gets funded, and that's not a good indication for anything, right? It's just like, if all tides are rising, even turkeys will fly, right? And so that doesn't mean anything at that point. So, startups are chaos, right? And chaos requires a lot of, entrepreneurs find structure to this pieces. So you don't want things to just sort of be handed to you. You need to work hard at it, right? It creates grit. You need to be able to work. So I didn't think about it twice to quit Google at that time. My mom was obviously very distraught, right? It's like, are you stupid? Like, are they firing you? I'm like, no. I gave my notice already, so they were sort of surprised that my wife was the only one that sort of was understood. She's like, yeah, that's fine. She's like, I'm a doctor. I can handle you not working. Right? So, anyways, long story short, I always get impressed with people who actually take the risk when everybody else tells you not to do it, right? And that's, I think, a good hallmark of any entrepreneur, right? As you don't want to listen to everything being told to you. You want to be able to follow your own heart. And if you're following somebody else's dream, it's not it's hard to make it work over time. But anyways, my background before Google, I had done a couple more startups. Google was the largest company I worked for. It was a few hundred employees was too much. It took me about 6 months to actually even say yes to Google because I didn't want to work for something that big. That was 800 employees at that time. And in the 4 years I was there, we went to over 30,000, right? And so I was glad to leave when Lehman's collapsed, right? So, and obviously things changed quite a bit since then as well, right? But some of my best friends are still at Google, right? So it's been a long time, and so it's a pretty good place, and I'm glad I actually worked there. I learned quite a bit about how to be a better entrepreneur and actually a better manager over time as well. So my investment career actually started while I was at Google. I actually did a lot of investments in startups alongside Jonathan Rosenberg and a few other people. So we would do investments, and even we got legal approval at Google. We actually changed the way Google actually allowed people to invest as well. And the feedback was from a mentor that I had was, don't just accept equity for free as an advisor, you buy it, right? And as soon as you buy something, your type A personality kicks in and you don't give up for any reason, right? But if somebody just gives you advisor equity, you get 0.1% or 0.2%, advice is cheap. You'll be able to give advice to anybody else, but if you really want to actually learn, you want to be able to put your money where it is, right? So don't ever take anything for free. And as an entrepreneur, don't give away anything for free, right? You want somebody to actually have skin in the game. You want them to actually give you the advice. I think 10 times before I actually open my mouth, right? Because the entrepreneur knows a lot more than I do. And I want to make sure that I'm not just giving advice. I need to actually learn and be able to provide. And sometimes bad feedback can actually be very detrimental. Actually, often is very detrimental, right? So you want to hold that piece. So anyways, if there's no questions, I can jump into the slide. And like I said, stop me anytime. I'll walk you through how we think about investing and what I've learned over the last 15 some years of doing this.
Okay, generally we keep the questions to the end, but you can raise your hands in order, and then if you want to write it in the chat, it's possible, but we prefer based on the hands raised, we'll address the questions.
All right. And should I share the deck from one side?
Yeah, why don't you do that if you don't mind?
Give me a second. I have too many windows open. 1 second.
Is it showing? Can you guys see the deck?
No, not yet.
Not yet. 1 second. Oh, there it is. You see it?
Not yet. It started showing the same thing there. If you can't, I can also do that too. Maybe I can try that.
It says it's sharing, but
That's fine. Screen share myself.
Okay, we're seeing.
So this is mine, and so what I'll do is
Choose
do
this
present, and then you can take over here, I think. Slideshow. What about you? See you.
Well, I guess your laptop is up with your camera, unless you want to shut off the camera.
sorry, technical difficulties. All right,
Perfect.
got it. Okay.
Can I switch it, sorry, for a second? So people can see your face when you present. On my camera here.
I'm surprised this didn't.
Perfect. I think we got it now. All right.
Yeah, so I'll walk you through. Everybody's heard about unicorns, all right? Anyone? Yeah, I'm assuming I'm not going to ask that question, but do you know what a dragon is? So I think unicorns. And so we focus on dragon. I'll walk you through what we mean by dragons and what unicorns are, right? Yeah, I mean unicorn is just an arbitrary value for a startup, right? It's anything over $1 billion worth of valuation is a unicorn. Now you can sort of thump your chest and sort of say, well, I own 5 shares in a unicorn, so I'm a good investor, but you bought it in a secondary market or it doesn't change your fund, but you have something in a unicorn, right? And unicorns also don't mean that you actually are building a good business. It just means you were good at raising money initially, right? I mean, you see how many unicorns are actually coming down to earth these days as well. So it's a completely an arbitrary value, right? A dragon is something that we define as something that returns my entire fund back. Right. So if I own, X percentage of a company and, let's say 10% of the company and my fund is a $10 million fund and I get a $100 million exit, well, that $100 million actually returned the entire fund back. Right. And so on. Right. So I don't even need it to be a unicorn to actually return the fund back. If you have a $50 million fund, $500,000 or $500 million exit, or if you own 20% or $250 million exit actually returns the entire fund back. So we have
time frame for that return.
I mean, typically, I mean, startups, IPOs take about 7 to 10 years, 11 years in that range, if you do a secondary beforehand. So, good companies take longer to exit. Bad ones will exit faster, right? So, anything good in life actually takes longer for feedback loops, right? And so, you need to be patient to be able to sort of see the good ones sort of come through, right? So, if you invest in year 3 or 4 of your fund, and it's a 10-year fund, well, the good ones in the 4th year may actually come in year 13, right? The final exit. Now you can exit earlier by selling it in a secondary market, but and then that's a choice you do playing the IRR game versus the total return game, right? And so you have to sort of play, so the math sort of changes. And I'll walk you through some of those pieces as well. Right. So unicorns, obviously get a lot of attention, right? Since Mary Meeker came up with the word, unicorns, this is, sort of on top of center. And a lot of people actually try to chase being a unicorn, right? And then you end up getting into worse term sheets, right? So when you look at term sheet, like, okay, well, I can get a 2x preference, a 3x preference. I'll give you the $1 billion valuation, but the first 2x money that comes in, I get it off the bat, right? And so founders agree to these unnecessary terms because they rather care about the arbitrary value of a valuation rather than actually what's the meat and bones underneath it, right? But the thing is, less than 1/4 of the unicorns ever return the fund back, right? So the returns are not as complacent with the unicorn status, right? So we when we do a new investment, I have to convince my partners, well, what is the chance of this company actually being a dragon? Right? What do my ownership needs to look like? So it's not about just sort of saying I'm only going to put $1 million or $500,000. It's what do I need to be able to own to sort of see this company eventually will be a dragon, right? So the conversation changes dramatically internally rather than just sort of saying, okay, well, I own 0.5% and the company's already worth $250 million and there's a good chance it'll become a unicorn. So this is good for your marketing, but not good for your returns, right? Venture is all about power law. Right, 1 in 10 companies is going to do most of your returns, right? And you want to be able to figure out which of those 10% companies are going to give you 90% of returns, right? So the power law is everything, right? So if you look at where these dragons sort of hit, right? Like if I want the unicorns and they're going to be massive returns, well, they're really hard to get by, right? So you need it in the bell curve, right, where the returns are happening. Right? So when you do a lot of spray and pray, you assume a normal distribution of returns, right? And that will get you into a really bad trouble as a fund, right? And I've seen so many angel investors and even large VCs actually sort of play the distribution game, right? But it's a concentration bet, right? You're using both your qualitative and quantitative mindset to be able to sort of figure out, well, which is the one that happens. And when it does start emerging, how do you make decision to put more money behind and which ones do you start? Right? So it becomes very Machiavellian very quickly, right? So if you know that only 1 in 10 is going to make it, well, do you really support the 9 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 or 3 out of 10? Right? So it's that decision that you end up making, is hard, right? So the best VCs that we've seen, and we're not the only ones, are dragon hunters, right? You very quickly sort of have the fundamentals down, the math, math is everything, right? So once you figure out what the math is correct, and I'll walk you through examples where we actually, even as a seed fund, would actually end up owning more of a company at the exit than we did at the initial, right? Most seed funds would actually go the other way around, right? That, you own 10%, and over time you get diluted, you may exit at IPO at 5% and 4%. We've done the opposite, where we know when the company is emerging, we will actually go out of our way to actually own more of that company. Because if it's a power law, it's hard to get those home runs. And when you get the home run, you want to actually put all your eggs in that basket, right? So I actually have a data scientist, an AI professor who I hired at Google, who actually works with us as well. So once we do the initial investment, we actually are not even waiting for the founders to share data with us. We actually pulled all the API information inside. We do the analysis ongoing. And we actually have our minds made up in terms of which companies we will actually invest in more. Right? So in this case, $1 billion arbitrary value is a unicorn. If you look at the blue line, right? A dragon can exist across the board, depending on what size fund you have. Right now, if I have $1 billion fund, well, for me to return the fund back, and if I own 10% of a company, well, the one that startup has to be a $10 million exit. right? And how many companies get to a $10 million exit? And that would just return the fund back by 1x. Now, if I want to return 3x my fund, I need to have multiple, 4, 5, 6 unicorns in my fund. And that's really hard. That is very, very hard, right? And so you end up becoming more like a private equity firm, right? You're okay with 2 or 3x return. You can't take risk. You already have large swaths of capitals already there, and you sort of say, okay, well, if I'm investing in a company and I just want to be able to do this, right? So that's not really venture, right? And you start up playing more of a private equity game. And like I said, we don't even require our dragons to be unicorns, right? We have plenty of examples where we've had dragon returns where they're under $500 million, even under $500 million, right? So when you want to play the seed game, right, being too big is actually not good, right? Because bad habits set in, you end up giving too much money, you actually end up doing too many investments, you can't actually help the founders, right? I was up this morning at 4:30 in the morning with a call with my founder because, he needed some help, right? Late at night, so you need to be available. It's not just board meetings, right? And if you have a spray and pray model where you're doing lots of investments, but you really can't help your founders, right? And actually, all of us enjoy doing this work, right? Right now, a bunch of my LPs, a lot of my LPs are also engineers by background, and we're doing an AI audit of all my startups, right? We're going from startup by startup, all of them. And that's the level of work, and then we're actually putting a support group together so they can actually help each other because, things are changing underneath so quickly that how do you actually learn and grow, right? Actually, we have a common person in there. Vibhu Mittal is actually on both sides, right? And quite a few of the Xooglers are there as well. The other part is, I see a lot of immigrants here as well, but, our focus has been US and India, just because our deal flow has been strong there. I went to school there. Most all my partners, except for one, we have John as our, for diversity purposes, we have a white guy on the team. Sorry. But we do have him here. But, so we do, and we found that immigrants actually, whether you come from China or India or Russia or other places, they're actually far better at building dragons than you do with second or third generations, right? Because there's the level of grit and also respect for, you're a lot more scrappy. Because you saw your parents actually struggling, you actually, grew up in that household. And so you don't actually spend other people's money as easily. So you're able to build, and your fundamentals are correct. Your math is stronger. All these things actually help quite a bit, right? So we found that the immigrant group is actually where we play really well, right? So the things that we care about initially, founders, it's like 80% of the battle for us. We spend a lot of our time actually learning about the founders. We have 10 different personality traits we track down. And we're always evaluating those personality traits as we're making decisions on where to invest. So things like, intellectual honesty, right? Fairness, sense of economics, right? There's things that you can teach them and coach, because we're also figuring out, we're coaches, right? I used to play the game, but being a player on the field versus being a coach, it took me about 4 years of letting go, right? That wasn't easy initially. So as we work with founders, you want to know that there's a sense of rebelliousness, that they won't listen to everything I say. If they listen to everything I say, that's not good. I want them to push back, right? But you don't want them to push back so much that they don't listen to anything. So there's a fine line between those two things, right? So we want to be able to understand, are they coachable? Are they rebellious? They're opposite ends of the same coin, but there's a balance between those two, right? And so we look at all these personality traits, and then we make that's part of our investment decision making as well, right? Business models matter, right? You want to be you don't want to be in where incumbents are 80-90% of the market share, right? Because they will, and if the market is declining, the incumbents get entrenched, and it's really hard to beat them, right? You want to be where the market's growing, and that can be, shuffle. Like, for example, you don't want to build a new search engine today. It's really hard, right? Because the incumbents are actually really powerful, and they continue to build out. You don't want to be in the ad tech market, right? Because either Google or Facebook will either copy you or kill you or buy you. And if you only have two buyers, well, you don't get the price, right? There's no market left, right? And so you need to sort of decide which market you're playing in. And when you do invest, we come with conviction, right?
So for founder matters most,
Like how do you examine the identity trait, like some questionnaires or something? It's, have you read the book Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 Hours? It's sort of like that. Like when you do something long enough, you sort of get good at it. It's really hard for us to sort of pinpoint, but there's 5 of us, all of us have been entrepreneurs. We've been doing this for over, actually my other partners have been doing it for 30 years, right? And so you start picking up these traits. You don't have to be right all the time, right? You cannot be right all the time, right? And so you're going to make mistakes. It's like your batting average in either in cricket or in baseball, right? You just need to be better than everybody else. You don't need to be 100%. If you're 100%, you're not taking risk. But you don't want to be below the median, right?
How much time does it take for you to answer that question? And
sometimes, so we can't make a decision in 1 or 2 meetings. It takes multiple meetings. I'll have to take them out to dinner. I mean, the pandemic did make it hard because everything had to be on Zoom. So we had to learn how to do these things over Zoom a lot more than we were doing before. So, and also reference checks very quickly, right? So we actually put systems in place to be able to sometimes while I'm doing the meeting with them on Zoom, I actually can figure out there's 4 or 5 people I know in common, and I'm already texting them while they're talking. Right. So that's the, like sometimes, I remember one time I was making this example where this person was presenting and he had one of the logos of the company that they were already working with as a customer. And that customer was actually, the CEO was my college roommate. So I texted him, I got an answer back in 5 minutes, like, no, they pitched us, we hated it, we never used it. We gave them a little POC just to sort of do the initial one trial, but we canceled it. And this person's claiming that that's one of the customers, right? So of course we didn't move forward, right? But so you want to be able to trust but verify very quickly, right? So reference checks, there's things that your mom or dad should have taught you, but there's nothing I can do. I mean, if you're lying or if you're cheating or doing something, it's really hard to teach you not to do it. And if you do this to me, you're going to do this to your employees. And, it's one thing to do to me, but your employees aren't going to trust you. How are you going to hire? How do you scale? So all these traits, you may have a really good idea, but your personality traits don't allow you to build it to scale. Right. And so you need to be able to know, I also sort of say, life's too short to work with assholes. So you might as well decide not to do it. Right. Somebody else may or may not. Right. But it's not worth, money is good, but you don't want to be to sort of give that away as well, right? So working with good people that can actually build companies, it doesn't mean that they're pushovers. So they're very strong-willed, but there's a difference between being fair and being equal, right? Being fair, for example, if your best friend from college is your head of engineering or product or design, if they're not performing well or they're doing something like, can you fire them? Right. That's being fair because fair to everybody else, right? Because how often have you seen somebody who shouldn't be working or not doing the right thing continues to stay in because your manager just can't make a decision? And that's actually, the good people will leave first. So your company will actually get destroyed over time, right? So these personality traits are it's not about being fair or it's being both, right? And always starts at the top, right? If your culture starts at that point. Answer your question? Yeah. Sorry. Okay. And the last one is, the investment with conviction. So we don't like party rounds, right? If there's 10 other people, like who's helping the founder, right? Also, as a founder, if you have too many, if everybody's putting $100,000 each, well, whose decision do you take? Like whose advice, whose feedback? And what happens is none of them actually have any interest in spending too much time, right? And so, you want to find people both from a founder's perspective that come with conviction, and also as a VC, you want to come with conviction, right? So we actually analyzed our prior history where we would either follow somebody else's lead or do it our own. We actually found a cohort where we actually led the deals. We got 11x returns on our money, cash on cash, and where we actually followed somebody else's 1.2x, right? So there's a big difference between those two places, right? And so we decided we're not going to ever, we will invite other people to join our deal, but we will not follow, right? So there's something like, we don't know what all the reasons were, but the data was pretty clear. And there's over 250 deals, so it was a pretty statistically valid deal.
Does it mean that you always prefer to lead the round?
Yeah. I mean, the data sort of told us the answer. And so before we were pretty open on both sides, right? And so after that was all in the last 10 years been very with conviction, right? And then adding value, right? It's like, it's money, but money with good feedback of value is VC, right? You don't want to just be money and syndicating. You want to be able to add value. You want to be able to bring something else that nobody else can, right? And it's also the fun part because you want to be able to work I mean, if I was just putting money and not spending time with the founders, it would be boring for me. I'd probably just go back being a founder, right? So this actually helps with my ADD. I can actually spend, every day with a different founder. I'm actually being pushed by them to actually think harder. It's actually more fun for me. And I don't bring the stress back home. The stress is all with the founder. Right?
And
I have a different level of stress.
How often do you meet with founders on average?
So early when we do the initial investment, it's like at least once a week, if not more. So it's pretty frequent. And then as they start getting the sea legs, and you pull back, right? So I don't want to push unless they pull, right? So and I always tell the founders in the first board meeting, I'm like, if I stop adding value, if I'm not adding anything additional, you should tell me to not come. Because I don't want to waste your time, because at that point, if I'm, you're just humoring me, and at a certain point, you're going to graduate, you don't need me, right? And it's okay to tell me to F off, right? And if I'm giving you bad feedback, you should tell me that up front, right? So I lay the groundwork from day one, so they're usually surprised, because I'm like, it's not worth it. Like if you don't need this piece, and if you tell me, okay, well, this is not appropriate, then either I have to roll up the board and bring somebody else on board as well, right? So it's, at the end, I want to be able to make money. I don't care about being right, right? There's not, I can't do everything all the time, right? And so if you don't need me anymore, that's fine, right? And I'm usually pretty blunt and honest with these things because it's just not worth wasting my time or their time. So this is what keeps me up at night, because I want to be able to learn and keep up with it, right? And this is where my intellectual stimulation happens as well. Like for example, did a space investment a few years ago, right? I had zero idea about space except that I want to go there someday, right? So we did a space investment, but I spent a huge amount. Actually, one of the ex-Googlers, he was a space engineer at Carnegie Mellon, and so I just flew over, spent a week with him, and he taught me everything he knew, right? And then I was able to, keep this conversation with this founder. This person actually built space propulsion systems in NASA. He's a professor of space in Michigan Tech. And so this guy was as good as they come. So how do you sort of even mentor this guy, right? So I never want to be able to mentor somebody in technology, because if I'm better in technology than my founders, then there's something wrong. And I'm not investing anyways. The value that we bring in is actually pattern recognition, whether it's pricing, distribution, hiring, firing, scaling the company. All these other places are far more important, right? But you have to understand the technology well enough to be able to give that feedback. But I don't need to be, it's the iceberg. I don't need everything under the iceberg in technology. I just need to know enough to sort of say, well, you shouldn't be, doing X, Y, Z, right? But on the other hand, because I knew what he was selling, I knew, somebody I knew was the head of CIA, so I was able to get him $100 million contract to CIA, right? So that's the value that he couldn't have gotten through, right? So, okay, so just to drill deeper into the founders matters most, right? I've already covered some of these things in there, right? So I like founders. You need at least, two founders, co-founders. Like, one is too hard, right? Building a company is very, very difficult, right? And so you need, just like raising a child, right? You need two people, right? It's hard being a single parent raising a child. It's very hard raising a startup being single. But three is a crowd, right? Like you don't want your mother-in-law also be involved in raising a child, right? It's the same thing. So, sorry, I'm usually pretty blunt on these things. And then, you want to blend the confidence with humility. Right. You were rebellious, like I was mentioning some of those dichotomies, right? So there's a fine line between those two. We like entrepreneurs that are always learning, right? It's like if you had a startup before and you failed, one of the questions we ask them is like, okay, well, what happened? And, if I hear the answer like, oh, well, it was the VP of engineering messed up on this thing, or this happened, the customers broke. But never will they say it's my fault, right? And so that then they haven't learned. Because if you haven't self-reflected on what you did wrong, you will make the same mistakes again when you start up. So the answer there would be like, okay, well, yeah, my head of engineering screwed up on this thing, but because I didn't hire well, or I didn't give him the right resources, or I didn't understand the product well enough to give him the right feedback, right? That means that you've actually learned, as a CEO, it's always your problem. That the buck stops with you. So if you blame somebody else, that means you haven't actually become a good leader, right? So we will walk away from the standards.
Yeah. Good question on the co-founders. I mean, from a legal perspective, that's a title, or actually you care about the equity?
Equity as well.
Like what's the percentage-wise considered as a co-founder, not just a title?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I actually have a very interesting framework how you divide up equity. And it's not about equal. If I say equal, it means you haven't thought through it. And those problems will come back later, right? So maybe after the presentation, I can draw out a chart on how to divide equity. The other part is, fire in the belly is very important, right? Like the reason I did my startup is because you look at somebody else and say, well, I'm smarter than that guy. If he can leave and do the startup, well, I can too, right? And so competition is a very key part, right? And so you want to be able to prove that you can do it, right? And you have something that's different. Failure is actually useful. I actually like founders who failed already and they're ready to do it again. That's actually a good sign, right? But if you fail 6 or 7 times, maybe it's you, right? But when you failed already, you raise money, somewhere else and whatever else, the company failed. It's okay, shit happens, but you're ready to do it again. The tuition's already been paid, right? So the sunk cost is there, so now you're a better bet, right? And so I don't find any difference between a first-time founder and a successful founder doing a second time. People assume that I was successful, that I'm going to be successful again. It's not the case. So we've looked at large sets of data with that as well. I worked with a professor at Stanford on this. Looked at thousands of startups and cohorts of founders that had been successful exits first, and they were doing the second or third startup. There was no difference in final returns, right? But people believe that success will breed more success. Actually, it's quite the opposite sometimes, where you assume that you were successful, so you don't start stressing about the small thing. Like, I'm already thinking about my $100 million valuation rather than how do I make my first $10,000 in revenue, right? So they don't like, oh, I've already done this before, so I'm going to get there. So these are not things I'm going to deal with. And so what happens? It reminds you, right? And so it's a new venture. And so we don't actually prefer founders that have been successful too often. If you have some success, like I sold my company for 20 or 30 or $50 million and you want to do it again, that's actually pretty good, right? So we built this internal ways of thinking about how to value these things, right? We love technical founders. If I describe my job to anybody, describing to my daughter, she was one of the hardest interviewers I had. So I think of myself as a therapist, right? Working with the founders, there's a lot of stress. Like, you go tell your spouse that, if you're having trouble at work. Well, you can't, because they said, well, you should just stay at Google. Like, why'd you quit? Or your mom. Or you can't talk to your priest or anybody else, right? And so your employees, of course, want you to know all the answers. So you can't tell them you're having doubts. So who do you talk to, right? And so you become a therapist for your founders, right? And it's lonely and it's very stressful. So you want to be able to be the relief on that thing. So you have to build trust with the founders. Right? So I spent a lot of time with them initially because it allows them to sort of build trust. Right. So we take technically sound founders, and our job is to convert them into good CEOs. Like, nobody's born to be a CEO. Just like, there's no school to be a product manager, right? You learn, if you have a good mentor, then you become a good product manager. If you're not, you go to school for engineering or project management and all these other things, but not for product management and not for CEO, right? So how do you know if you're a CEO, right? And so you have to be able to train and have to mentor them, right? So that's where the coaching comes in. Does that answer the question? Okay. Right. So business models do matter. I actually like things that are unit economics profitable, not total EBITDA profitable, but unit economics. Like, if I spend $100, am I making $150 back? I may still be spending more money on R&D and marketing, but at least I know the actual economics works, right? So we are able to understand, we work even at $40 billion valuation, didn't have a business model. Now they're worth $160 million, right? right? I mean, it's because the unit economics never got figured out, right? I mean, Google was extremely profitable, having only raised $80 million, but they never used more than 10. But, you know, they never touched more than $10 million in the bank, but at $80 million raise, they were able to go public, right? And so why is it that companies need $1 billion, $2 billion, $3 billion worth of investments to get somewhere, right? That means you haven't gotten the fundamentals correct about how to build a business. Now, if the unit economics is working, then I can pour more money into scale, because as soon as that, like Amazon was extremely profitable underneath it, right? But Jeff was spending so much money on scale that it looked like it was burning cash. But if you stop that tomorrow, like if the market's crash, you stop that, you're profitable next day. Right? So you have to be able to know which, the underlying business model, right? So we really focus with our founders, getting them. So our goal is to get them to unit economics profitability with less than $15 million raised, right? So from day one, we start sharing these things and how do you build these models out, right? So we spend a lot of time on pricing, right? Gross margins. Like I give you an example. One of our companies, Poshmark, which is a fashion e-commerce company, they did their gross margins. They're a rake. You know what a rake is? So if I charge $100 to a customer as a marketplace, I charge you 5% or 6% or 20%. So eBay's is 5%, 6%. So he charged the same percentage because eBay's been doing it for so long, right? We helped him actually increase it from 6% to 20%, right? And that was not easy to do, right? Everybody else on the table, all the other venture firms are like, are you crazy? You're going to kill the business. But he had a social networking model underneath the e-commerce company. So the value was not just e-commerce, it was also the women that were connecting to each other as well. So there's a lot more value than not just the transaction. So we actually figured out we could increase the pricing by 4x, right? In that sense, you only lose 10% of customers, and that's worth the risk you take, right? But you have to be able to take those pieces. So this is where our value comes in, right? Pricing. If I can charge you the right price for what I deliver the value for, then I can build a stronger business. I can now actually get to unit economics profitability 4 times faster, right? So this is the only e-commerce company that went public with profitability. Actually, EBITDA
Do you know
profitability.
that number that you will lose only 10% of the customers before you increase the price, or is something that?
No, we looked at data very clearly. We actually tested it. I did A/B testing with a data scientist. So this is so we don't actually just tell the founders. We actually roll up our sleeves and help them, right? So I'm good at asking questions, but I need somebody else to answer the questions, right? So this is why we pull all the data in-house as well, so that our data scientist in-house, he analyzes the information as well.
So you have all the data from your portfolio?
Yeah. The financials I don't care about as much. The financials are not leading indicators, they're laggard, right? By the time it shows up in the financials, it's already 6 months late, right? I want to get the engagement data, the details up front. That's where all the information is headed, right? That's where our recognition, our patterns, our background sort of help more. Whereas if a lot of these things the founders may not even have thought about, right?
So you're kind of taking business viability part of the risk and assessment out of, like they outsource it to you.
No, I don't ever want to do that either. So what we do is, so there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? So that, okay, I'm going to do this, option A, option B. And often in board meetings, they're like, okay, well, I'll be off like about this. There's 3 and 4 ways also to think about it. Now, at the end, you have to decide which one you want.
But I mean, the startup probably cannot ever up you on your experience and your data scientists and insight and visibility and,
So it helps, yeah. But I'm also trying to be humble as well. Yeah, it does, but it becomes it's a better conversation to have around those pieces rather than sort of saying, I think this is correct. Right? So, the gut is also very strong, right? So I can optimize the hill with data, but I cannot tell you how to find the next mountain. Right. So I don't want to take that ability from the founder to find the next mountain as well, right? Because that's not where I'm good at, right? Well, I won't be good at unless I'm spending 100% of my time on the startup, right? And so as a founder, you have more perspective than I ever will. So, but that hill that you've built, how do you optimize it, right? That's what we're good at, right? So here's a bunch of other things we also look at as well, but I'll skip through this in essence of time here. So like I said earlier, my mentioned conviction does matter, right? So where the ownership happens and the returns that happen, right? And so we've gotten 6x total return across all our investments, right? And so our fund one was 6.2x return, right? So because we focus on dragons, we come with conviction, and we actually increase our stakes in these companies as well, right? And we actually found a way to
that implies that valuation matters, right, for you?
Yeah.
Entry point.
Yeah, entry point does matter quite a bit. Yes.
And what stage do you enter?
It's seed. Yeah. Usually the first.
First, what do you think about the increased valuations that happened during 2021?
Yeah, we pulled back. We didn't do as many investments. I mean, we were just sitting like either we're smoking something or everybody else is smoking something, but we pulled back. So we did less than half the investments we typically would do in a year. So we've seen these cycles every 7 to 10 years, right? It just goes off the roof and then it comes crashing down. So we wait until it comes crashing down. Right? Because it's just not, because if you pay a high price at, if you're paying 2x the valuation that you would have otherwise, right? Nothing changed, right? It's like, okay, two people with a business model, no product. Well, I was getting 10 million last year, now on 25 million. Why? And it's hard because at that point, it's very hard to scale it beyond that as well, right? So, I mean, I've been a founder more often than I've been on this side, right? So you can see both angles, right? And I actually wrote an article about, how do you actually think about seed valuations? Because there's nothing to look at, there's no financials to look at, there's nothing, right? You want to make sure that there's enough for everybody across the board because the risk is also pretty high on the investor side, right? I mean, nobody else, before Silicon Valley Ventures sort of started, nobody would do these things besides eccentric billionaires, right? Or no banks can actually figure this out, right? So there's a lot of risk you take, and it's a power law. 1 in 10 will succeed. So the other 9 are going to fail. So the one that does work, you can't have the valuation so high that even that one doesn't return the money, right? So you don't want to kill the goose with the whole thing, or whatever the phrase is, right?
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
But at the same time, you have LPs, right, that are expecting to get the returns. So what do you do in this case?
Yeah,
Just hold cash. So.
Well, So right now, this year, we're doing twice the pace.
Oh, okay.
So we catch up. So the thing is, there's never a dearth, right? So where a lot of people are pulling back and not doing investments because they made a lot of dumb mistakes in the last 2-3 years. Well, they're holding that. So I take the Warren Buffett style of investing, right? You want to invest when there's blood on the street. You don't want to be investing when you're a maid and your Uber driver are giving you investment or startup advice, right? So that's when I run the other way, right? When I get advice from people on which startups to do, and everybody's doing startup investments, that's when you pull back, right? Because there will always be a new pig to the slaughter, right? I just don't want to be that pig. Right? Does that answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
I will always answer questions, even if it's politically incorrect. So adding value does matter, right? I mean, this is, like I mentioned earlier, these are the kind of things we actually do focus on with our founders, right? We also take our founders through sort of a pitch deck of Series A demo day, which is very unusual for VC firms to do. So this is the 4th year we're going to be doing it. They do 5-minute presentations in front of about 500, VCs and sort of corporate C-level execs, right? So that's the other value, right? Because they're able to actually raise the next round of financing, which actually helps me, less dilution for me. Like the more startups actually get invested in. The second part is actually getting the more customer revenue, right? So we do this every year with all our startups as well. So that was it.
Thank you so much. Let me see if we have any hands raised from our participants. We have Nate. Nate, would you like to ask a question? You're on mute. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, that was just a reaction. That's all. It was a clap for an awesome talk.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Nate.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions, if I may ask, as the people come up with their questions. So Dragon, I have like one tiny question. So Dragon is one exit that makes up for the whole fund.
Yeah.
So even if it's like 5% of the whole fund you invested, but it returns the like equal amount at least the amount of the entire fund.
Yes.
And what is, you mentioned product and it's a kind of a pain, but what are your thoughts generally in having a product-focused founder on the startup team, or how do you evaluate if this founders are super duper technologists, how do you evaluate their skills that can they indeed productize the technology?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the founders, the co-founder as well, right? I mean, so, productizing. So there's 4 different risks that we assess, right? So one is the founder risk, right? You may be in a honeymoon period, but you never know if you're going to survive the valley of death, right? When things don't go as well, people start blaming each other, right? And so our risk, the biggest risk we have is whether these founders are going to survive the next, 18 months, right? The next risk is if you figure that out, is a technical risk, right? The product, the technology just doesn't work or doesn't do what it was supposed to do. The third risk is, a product and business risk, right? It does what it's supposed to do, right? The team survived. But people are not willing to pay enough money for this to be worth it, right? So there's no business model risk as well, right? The fourth risk is financing risk. It's like I just can't raise enough money. Either my team is not quite there or the market's not there, whatever else happens. So there's fourth risk. So as a founder or a CEO, you have to be able to eliminate all those 4 risks as fast as you can, right? So, now if you have a co-founder that you had another startup with in the past, well, that's a very good sign. Or you worked on the same team at the last company or the last, whatever else, that's a good sign. Now, if you work college roommates, maybe not as much, right? It's a sibling or somebody else, so there's a tier piece of it, right? So I know the person really well, but haven't been stressed to work with them, right? Because when you put somebody in a pressure cooker, how they react is very different than if you went to drinks with them. Right? So that's the first risk, and then as you go through. So product risk is always there, but it's one of 4 risks that we look at, right? So each one of them can kill the company.
Yeah.
Right.
Sarah, we have a question.
Please, Lamia, please go ahead.
Thank you, Manu. Such a pleasure meeting with you today, and thank you for making the time and the very insightful conversation. Manu, quick question on how was the different startups in your portfolio, specifically from a scalability point of view. So this definitely would be hard on your side to scale unless you hire more basically investors from your side or more GP on your side in order to be able to scale time-wise, while GP would also increase the overhead of the fund. So you need to raise more fund, which would translate into going away from the micro VC model. How do you think about it, and where do you put, like the scalability limitation, and how do you deal with it?
You're asking about a scalability on our side, right? Yeah, good question. We've actually made a very conscious decision many years ago that we will never actually raise be bigger than $150 million ever. Right? Because then we will have to start playing in a different game and doing Series A and beyond. And we don't know if we're going to be good at that. We know we're good at the seed level, and that we enjoy doing this, right? And so the only reason you do funds get bigger and bigger, and we had looked at this very seriously, there's a perverse feedback loop, right? You get 2% of 100 million, you get 2% of a billion. Or you get a 2% of a 10 billion, right? So I will just raise a bigger fund because I get 2% fees and I can get rich on the fees alone. I don't have to worry. So the performance is on the 20%, right? The dirty little secret in VC is like 50% of the venture funds never even return the money back. Right? So, but I get to keep the fees. Right? So I keep the 2% fees, but but if I don't get that into carry, well, I don't return the 20%, but so what? Right. So to us, having the 20% is very important. Right. So what we do is we actually return all 2% back to our investors. Right. So at the end of the fund, we don't take any carry until all the money is returned back. But some other VCs also do the same thing. And so our performance on our incentives are very well aligned. 20% of the fund, actually 18% this year, is actually us. Right, the 5 of us actually put enough money in for 18% of the fund. So we have a lot of skin in the game at the same terms as the LPs, as the investors. So I don't have an incentive to actually get bigger, right? Because I know my performance will go down. And we've also looked at the best bell curve performance for seed level VCs is between 50 and 250. After that, the performance actually starts declining on both sides, right? So we wanted to be within that bell curve, right? Again, very data driven, right? We looked at these things with large numbers of data. The other reason, I think the biggest part was just we put our money where our mouth is. We also got leverage. Actually, we found a way to have another fund where we don't have any fees or carry, but we actually buy enough pro rata so that we can actually pass the pro rata over to Inventus. So we do 75% of the initial seed investment is done by a side fund, which we manage, but it's by a group of very super angels that actually give us this money, but we don't charge them anything for that. And in exchange, all the pro rata rights from that actually gets passed to us. So as we know which companies are going to be in the power law, we actually buy the super pro rata for future rounds. So we can actually juice our returns. So it's almost, we found a way to actually get, I wouldn't say we use the word leverage, it's the option value. I'm buying the option by giving up the fees and carry in exchange for the option to buy more of the company later on.
Very awesome.
Right? So we act like a $300 million fee, but we don't need to. So if my denominator is lower, I can get into carry faster. So it's actually good for my investors. So it actually juices our returns by almost 3x.
Absolutely. And you get to your carry without having to buy it first through the main fund.
Yeah. So we've actually been innovating how a VC firm should be run. Actually, we've also been using lots of AI and data science to actually run the VC firm as well. Not just making new investment, but actually we're building a digital analyst as well, an AI analyst, that we can look at thousands of deals at the same time as well. So
interesting. How do you keep all of that under 2% operating cost? I mean, this costs money. This costs a lot of money to build in-house, right?
No, it doesn't. I think you can always spend more money if you can leverage. So I have three of my LPs actually love doing this stuff anyways, and so they're on board. I have one of my data scientist AI persons from Brazil. He just loves. So we have actually a really solid team, but we're not doing it just by building a large R&D team, right? So you can do this very effectively.
But nice. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, do we have any other question here?
Maybe I will ask one more, and I apologize if it's not appropriate. But if you think about your current portfolio, can you name maybe one or two companies that are currently most excited about, and what makes you excited about them?
Sure. It's like, unlike your kids, you don't have a favorite, right? There are definitely favorites here. There's a company, Orbion Systems, it's a space propulsion system company. So I looked at space quite a bit, and we don't like capital intensive things, right? And because our fund is small, and so you don't want to have a wall of capital in front of you because it will just bury you completely. But I was looking for something that could actually work across the board into many different companies. And so they built a new propulsion system that can actually keep a satellite in orbit for twice as long. So for any company, you're putting a satellite in orbit, you put this module in there. And so instead of a 4-year lifespan where the satellite stays in orbit, it stays for 7 to 8 years. So your CapEx is now half, right? And in this case, they had a patent, and they're the only company in the world that has it, except for one company in Russia. And with the Ukraine war, that company can't sell anywhere. So they became the de facto seller. So, so luck is also important, right? I mean, so we invested in before the war had started. So I'm pretty excited that the founder is just absolutely amazing. It's rare for a professor to actually be very entrepreneurial. I would always bet against a professor, actually. We never have funded a professor in the past because they just like to lecture, but they don't actually build. Right, he's a rare exception, and so I've loved the founder on that piece, and it's a pretty large opportunity here, right? So that's one company. Another one is a company in the virtual reality space. They actually have built a technology that sort of like the Harry Potter, where you have a physical paper and the video starts popping out. So they built this where using your phone, you can actually, a greeting card actually become 3D, it can actually become a video. And so they're actually attacking the entire card industry, which is $40 billion. those two, I think there's a lot more, but I think those two top of mind.
I have one. So you spoke a lot about how you evaluate founders, right? So in your history as a startup founder as well. So if you had to evaluate kind of yourself in your startup days, given that perspective, maybe what takeaways would you have, or what advice would you have given yourself?
Yeah, I would say I should have, my company that the gaming company I did, I should have spent a lot more time actually picking the right VC rather than the one that gave me the highest valuation. So I picked the one with the highest valuation, and the VC was absolutely horrible, right? It's like never added value. It was actually took away time. The angel investor we had before was actually amazing, would come up every week. And so I eventually just, about 6 months into it, I just told them no more board meetings. And this is what I tell my founders. So like, if I stop adding value or I'm negative, like you can tell me to fuck off, right? And it's okay. So I think my advice to my younger self would be to actually spend more time on people that create value than just the one that gives you the highest money, because the one that gives you the most money doesn't know how to value you either, right? Because they just want to be in a deal rather than actually being the right person in the deal, right? And so I think I would have chosen a better partner in that sense. So that's the biggest learning I had.
Piggybacking on that question, I'll ask, if you had an opportunity to go back and change some of your investment decisions, like to do or not to do.
There's so many. Where do I start?
Your favorite or most painful?
I missed Lyft by a day.
Wow.
I had the term sheet ready, but my friend Manu introduced me to them a few days too late, right? But in 2 days I had the decision made, because we already had looked at the space, and that would have been a good one. Snap. I had built 2 different social networking sites, and so I knew a lot about social networking, but I looked at the company and I was like, why would anybody want to have a 30-second exploding thing? I'm like, this is just dumb. And the only people that would want this is teenagers and politicians, right? And so I didn't think the market was that big. Even though I knew everything about the space, I just missed that completely. So I think sometimes when you know too much about something, you actually find ways, because your mind sort of finds all the negative reasons, right? So I've actually found where I'm actually better at is when I have not too much knowledge, right? I haven't done a gaming company. The other one I missed was I mentored this guy for almost a year and a half, a company called Dream 11. It's a fantasy sports out of India. He was a few years junior in my college in Columbia. And I had the term sheet done. Everything was ready to go. I loved the thing. I couldn't convince 2 of my partners in India to do the deal. That I was gambling, and I just couldn't get over the hump. And that deal would have been worth 36 times my money back. No, actually, 36 times the entire fund.
Wow.
Sorry, it was a 36 times dragon. And this company is $10 billion worth and producing about $500 million worth of profit a year. It's a private company. Right. And so this would have been an amazing outcome. So I think that was my biggest. Every year he sends me a case of champagne, which is sort of not. No. I mean, I mentored him even beyond that. Like, so when you mentor somebody, you also do this without any, you need to be able to give rather than just expect anything back in return.
I think Ashok has a question. Go for it.
Hi, Manu. Thank you for this very, very insightful discussion. Thank you so much for your time. My question is, how do you handle an investment that is kind of going south? Because it's a VC fund, that there are more failures than successes. So when you notice something is not like right on track, what's typical action plan and how do you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, this happens quite often. So there's nothing so a few things, like, you're very clear with the founder in terms of what it takes to raise the next round of financing. Right? You don't want to get into the habit where you're constantly bridging them. Right? Now, it could be like, where a bridge might be necessary because, for whatever reason, right? I mean, those should be rare. Like, you don't want to make those exceptions a rule. You want the third party to sort of evaluate it, right? And so the industry has figured out over many years how to make this work well, right? So a good rule of thumb is you want to be able to do your pro rata, but only if somebody else leads the round. So it's up to the founder to be able to go convince and bring a new lead in, right? And if they can't, well, maybe you end up, So the thing is, like, the success and the failures are easy to understand. It's the ones in the middle that are not going to fail, but not going to win, right? So they're the living dead, right? Those are the hardest ones, right? Because there's always that hope that they'll make it. And then, so you sort of get stuck. So there's two things that happen there. One, you sort of just sell the company back to the founder for $1, which we've done many times. And so it's like, well, I just don't know what I can do to help you get over the hump, right? Sometimes it happens the founders just don't have the capacity or understanding how to scale, right? They were really good technologists. They built it, now it's a lifestyle business doing $5, $6, $7 million of revenue. They can make 20% EBITDA. And, it's better than working at Google, but it's not a venture return. So in that case, we'll just sell it back to the founder for $1, right? It shit happens, right? It's like, not, and if that's out of technology startups, software startups, only about 6% ever raise venture money, right? It doesn't mean the other 94% are not good investments. They're just not venture financeable, right? You can have a $20 million software business that does really well for you and your co-founders, right? But it shouldn't have been raised venture money, right? But when money is cheap, right, like it was in 2022 and then lots of companies get funded, and then they're going to come around and they don't get funded, and so then all the newspaper tech journalists will write about that there's a huge downturn in investments. Well, there's also a huge upturn in investment, but newspapers love to talk about sensation. They don't actually talk about what happened 2 years earlier. So if you draw the line and you take out the anomalies, they actually looks pretty fine, right? So you always should look at data in both longitudinal pieces, and sort of say, okay, well, if I take something out of context, I can prove anything, right? But those things won't sell. They won't sell eyeballs, right? So you have to sell newspaper or articles in a different way. Sorry, it was a long answer to your question.
I had a question.
Thank you.
So, like you mentioned that you should not take money from just anyone, right? Someone who adds the value you should take. So when you would have, when you were starting, how did you get the founders to take money from you? It would have been a cold start problem for you in that time, right?
Oh, for somebody to take money from me?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I should have finished my sentence earlier was, you always want to go to where you can get the highest value. You can't get that, you go to the next level. See, at some point as a founder, you're like, maybe the guy doesn't understand. Like if I give you an example, Travis at Uber, it took a long time to convince somebody to actually take a risk that, that Uber was smart, right? It's ride sharing, because which idiot is going to get into somebody else's random car that's not a licensed taxi, right? It was a hard concept to sort of sell. So he went through dozens and dozens of VCs, nobody understood it. Right. So at some point you have the conviction, you can't just assume that just because I didn't get money from Sequoia or Axel, well, this is done, right? You have to assume the other party also doesn't know as much, right? And so it's a marketplace. At some point it will clear. So you go where you think the value is highest, you ski downhill. At some point, if your conviction is high, you'll get money from your mom and dad or anybody, right? So you have to be able to raise money at some point. So that's the answer. If I was a founder, I would not just give up my dreams that easy, right? And because eventually you'll prove them wrong, or you're proven wrong, right? I mean, that's what the marketplace does. Luckily for me, I didn't start the fund. I joined the fund, and so they had a reputation already in place. So my partner also happens to be a family member. So it took me almost 5 years to say yes to join the fund. I was an LP in the fund for a while. I didn't have any intention of joining the fund. I actually was happy being a founder, and I eventually joined when I was bringing that one home. So she changed the opinion. Like when I wanted to be a dad, I wanted to spend more time at home. As a founder, you're working 70, 80 hours a week, right? So that was the change. But my founder, had started, he actually commercialized TCP/IP. He actually took the company public. And so, so he had a massive following. He started an organization that has 70 chapters worldwide in entrepreneurship. And so there's a massive deal flow already in place. The Google deal flow is strong. I've been in the Valley for 32 years, right? And so, I was investing for almost 10 years before I joined the fund as well. So, so you sort of have a reputation that you play with. But, we're only doing 8 to 10 deals a year. I don't need to know everybody, right? I spent a lot of time in India. I built a Google office in India as well. I moved to India as well in 2005, right? I spent time in Brazil. So we have a lot of, I mean, when you have enough gray hairs, you build that reputation, right? If I was 22 years old doing this, I think it would be harder.
The last question before we wrap up, could you just share with us the way your formula for dividing equity you mentioned?
Oh, okay.
Would you like to?
I'll like to draw this out. I don't know if you guys can see this. So. Yes, I pulled this into 4 different quadrants, right? So if I said 25% each, right? So you have, at the beginning of the startup, when you incorporate, 100% is owned by you and the team, right? So in this bucket, you'd be like, this is their founders, right? So it's both of you started the company at the same time, right? You can decide, okay, we get to put this 50-50, or if somebody started earlier, they had sweat equity, you may do this like, 30-70 or whatever number happens. But you focus on that bucket, right? And another bucket is function, your title, right? If you're the CEO, right? In this bucket, you should at least get, let's say there's 2 founders or 3 founders, right? You should get 70% involved in this area, some range. So it cannot be equal, right? Because the CEO is taking a bigger risk. You have the title. So in this discussion, in this 25% bucket, you should have that conversation, right? So what happens is when people decide, I have 100%, I start dividing it up, you end up, just to not have an argument or to keep it plain, just divide it equally, right? And because you haven't thought through these pieces, right? Another part is money. Like if you actually put money into work, right? Then you should actually own it accordingly, right? And the last part, which was function. Sorry. So the function, and so this is the sweat equity, right? As well, and then the other one is function. So this is title, and this is function, right? I mean, just because you have a title called CEO, but you may also be the chief engineer, right? So there's a different sort of bucket that you sort of, in this case, it could be like, you're the startup guy, you're the designer, whatever else. This one is usually spelled equally, right? Because it's hard to argue because you're doing multiple roles. This is, so as you sort of put the maths together, then you sort of figure out how the equity breaks up, right? So what happens often, I've seen this happen down the road, like, the founder will come back and sort of say, no, we split equally, but I'm doing bulk of the work, I'm taking the biggest risk, and so we need to redo this. And nobody redoes anything after that, right? And that's where teams break up. So we like to sort of see where they've actually done the thinking up front so that you eliminate the risk down the road of actually something as benign as this actually breaking a team apart. But these things are very hard to get rid of. So even if you agree to disagree, but you will have a level of animosity to the other person, and that team sort of starts breaking apart, right? So what was found, this is to me it's not equal, but it's fair, right? So you don't want to be equal. Equal is an easy answer to everything, right? You want to be able to make sure you fairly discuss these things. And there might be another bucket, right? You can break it into another bucket if you wanted to, but I found these 4 to be a pretty reasonable way when you start the company initially. Because you only start with 100% and then you start dividing. So after this, obviously, you sort of say, okay, we're going to put away 20% for employees. Well, this is 100% of whatever that was, right? And then you dilute by 20%, everybody gets diluted by 20%. And then when you get the first investors, okay, well, maybe there's another 15% goes to your seed investors. And then you only start at 100%, you start diluting after that. Right. So it's not about the article that I think Chris shared with you over email as well. People focus too much on valuation. I think the value creation is the one that needs to be focused on, though, right? So how do you? So these things, anything you do with your founders, your VCs, who do you choose, your customers? It's all about how do I get more value creation faster, right? And not worry. Valuations just happen because like if the markets are really well, your valuations are higher. If the markets are down, well, your valuation may not be as well, right? But it doesn't matter. As long as you're doing the right thing, things always change, right? Like you may get 7% mortgage rate today, but if you hold on for 2 years, you can refinance for 2%. right? So nothing's ever fixed. You need to sort of know, if you don't focus on value creation, something else will take over.
And Manu, how does the departure of one of the founders affect this startup success? Let's say if it happens after 2 years, 3 years, from your experience.
I mean, people split up. Oh yeah, that happens all the time, right? I mean, just like a marriage. I mean, people split up. When things happen, shit happens. So, I mean, you just deal with that, right? So now you have equity that's deadwood, right? Somebody else has 20% equity. They want to leave now after 4 years. Well, what do you do, right? So I mean, you deal with it. You can dilute it over time because now, as subsequent rounds happen, that equity will be lower because you don't re-up it, right? So there's ways to do it. Like for example, in the round, let's say you're raising a Series B, right? You already have 7% in the employee pool. You don't think you need more, but you can go back to the VCs and sort of say, hey, can you create a 25% employee pool, right? I'm raising, so if you do the math, let's say you dilute yourself by 25% with the investment, and let's say you do another 25% of employee pool, which means that everybody here gets diluted by 50%. You turn around and you give this, let's say, except for, let's say 20% goes back to the founders. So that's how you dilute everybody else in the past. But you don't want to make this 50%, because that would be a little bit illegal as well, right? There's a level you can do to be able to play some games that you can actually clear up. Yes, at some cost. It was no longer there. They're not adding any value, but you can't get rid of them completely because they've already vested their equity.
Is there a way for these startups to buy back the equity from the?
You can try.
Founders?
Yeah, you can try. If they don't exercise it, they have 1 year, 90 days, or whatever in the contract. If they don't exercise it, then they forfeit the equity. If they do exercise it, then they get to keep.
It's options, right? But it's a restricted stock.
Yeah.
They don't need to exercise. It's
They don't have
vested to them, right?
They are. So in that case, you have to negotiate with them. Right? It's in one cash really bad, but then the investors may not want to give the cash because they're like, why am I buying? I'm getting this person an exit, and the company hasn't arrived yet. Right. So you want to be able to put your cash towards building a product, not actually buying equity.
Hold that thought because we have to get out of here. So I will just wrap this up and then we can continue this conversation. So thank you everyone who joined us online. This was a wonderful, wonderful session. Thank you, Manu,
You're welcome.
for sharing. Bye, everyone.